The wind came down from the high peaks with a sound like a sharpening stone, carrying the first hard bits of snow. It was a mean wind, the kind that promised to kill anything left exposed. The gray clouds boiled over the mountains, swallowing the last of the sun at 3 in the afternoon, promising a long, dark night. Down in the canyons, where the pines clung to the rock, 3 figures moved with a quiet that was older than the wind. They were Apache women, walking where they were forbidden to walk, hunting what they were forbidden to hunt, living a life they were forbidden to live. Nalin, the oldest, walked in front, her eyes, sharp and dark, missed nothing. She saw the flick of a rabbit's ear at 50 yards, the way a broken branch meant a deer had passed hours ago. The stain of soldiers' tobacco spat on a rock 3 days old. She was sharp-willed, her heart hardened by things she had seen and things she had lost. Every step she took on this land was an act of defiance. Her parents had died in a cavalry raid, their bodies left unburied by the creek, and her memory of it was as clear as the ice forming on the water. Behind her walked Tiva, the compassionate one, the one who still listened to the spirits. She carried the poultice bag and the gutting knife. Her gaze was softer, scanning the frozen ground for the tough, woody stems of herbs that still held their medicine. Tiva's spirit was bent toward healing, though her own was broken. Her brother, a good man who believed the white man's paper, had been shot during the treaty negotiations. A white flag of truce clutched in his cooling hand. Tiva still prayed, but she no longer prayed for peace. She prayed for strength. Last came Sata, the youngest, the silent one. She moved like a shadow, her face a mask of old anger. Her steps were heavy, almost a stomp, the only sound she allowed herself to make. Where Nalin was sharp and Tiva was soft, Sata was frozen. She had been 13 when the white miners found her gathering roots by the river. They had left her for dead. They had been wrong. They had only killed her voice. Sata had not spoken a word in 2 years. She carried a short, heavy spear, and her hand never strayed far from the knife at her belt. They were alone, far from the agency, avoiding the forced relocation to the barren flats of San Carlos. The reservation was a place of ration tickets, bad flour, and slow death. Here, in the mountains, there was hunger and cold and soldiers, but there was also freedom. It was a freedom they hunted for. One rabbit, one root, one day at a time. The snow was coming faster now, stinging their faces. Nalin held up a hand. The 2 women behind her stopped, instantly still. Nalin tilted her head, listening past the wind. There was another sound, the sound of the river, yes, but something else. A low, wet sound, a groan. Nalin moved toward the water, her rifle held ready. Tiva and Sata fanned out, their eyes scanning the rocks. Then Nalin saw it. Down by the river's edge, half sprawled in the icy water, was a man, a white man. He was a ruin. His clothes were torn to shreds, one leg bent at an angle that was wrong, the bone jutting through the fabric of his trousers in a dark, wet stain. His face was a map of blue and purple bruises, his hair matted with blood and dirt. He had been shot, at least twice, one wound in his shoulder, another high in his chest, both crusted with black blood. He was half-starved, his cheeks hollowed out, his lips cracked and blue. He was lying beside a dead horse, an animal that had also been shot multiple times. He was clearly, absolutely, left for dead. Tiva was the first to move, rushing forward and kneeling in the snow beside him. She put her ear near his mouth. "He breathes," she whispered, her voice tight. Nalin spat on the ground. "He is a white man. Let him finish his dying." Sata moved closer, her eyes cold. She drew her knife. She looked at Nalin, her expression clear. One cut, it would be a mercy. For him and for them. "No," Tiva said, placing her hand on the man's frozen chest. "Sata, no, we cannot." "He is the enemy," Nalin said, her voice flat. "Look at his skin. Look at his boots. He is one of them. He probably has a rifle that has killed our people. He is a man." Tiva argued, her eyes pleading with her friend. He is dying. The old ways say we cannot walk past a dying thing. Not if we have the power to help. The spirits see. The spirits also see us freezing to death while we argue over a white dog, Nalin shot back. Saving a life binds it to ours. Nalin, you know the law. It is a sacred debt. It is a sacred foolishness, Nalin said. We have no food for ourselves. We are hunted. What are we to do with this? This meat? Sata touched the hilt of her knife again. Her gaze locked on the man's throat. Tiva saw the motion and grabbed her hand. No! It is bad medicine to kill a man this way. A man who is already in the spirit world. It will bring a curse on us. Sata did not look convinced, but she did not move. Tiva looked back at the wounded man. His breath was a tiny, ragged puff of white in the air. He was close, so close to gone. We save him, Tiva said. And this time, her voice was not pleading. It was firm. Or we are no better than the miners who found Sata. We are Nende. We are the people. We do not leave a soul to the crows. Nalin stared at Tiva for a long moment, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She looked at Sata, who was trembling, but not from the cold. She was trembling with rage, wanting the kill. Finally, Nalin let out a long breath. You are a fool. Tiva, your heart is too soft. It will get us all killed. She looked down at the man. But he is heavy. If you want him, you will help carry him. Sata sheathed her knife with a grunt of disgust, but she moved to the man's feet. Getting him back to the cave was a nightmare. He was a big man, and even half-starved. He was a dead weight. They made a rough travois from their blankets and 2 pine branches. But the ground was steep and slick with new snow. They hauled him up the narrow goat path, slipping and cursing. Nalin pulled from the front, her muscles straining, her heart bitter with every step. Tiva and Sata pushed from behind, their moccasins sliding on the icy rocks. Twice, the travois slipped, and the man slid, his shattered leg knocking against a stone. The sound he made was not a groan, but a thin, high shriek that cut through the storm. After that, he was silent. He is dead, Nalin said, dropping her side of the poles. Tiva rushed to him, ignoring the snow that soaked her knees. She pressed her fingers to his neck. His heart is still there. It is like a trapped bird, faint. Then let us hurry, before we all freeze, Nalin said, picking up the poles again. It took them 2 hours to cover the mile to their shelter. It was a hidden cave, the mouth covered by a curtain of ancient ivy and a tumble of boulders. Inside, it was deep and dry, the air still and cold. It was their secret place, a place the soldiers would never find. They dragged him into the darkness, to the back of the cave where they kept their small fire pit. They laid him on their own sleeping furs, a sacrifice that made Nalin's jaw tighten. Tiva started a fire, her hands moving quickly, striking flint to steel, catching the spark in a tinder nest of dry moss. As the small flame grew, it lit the cave, the shadows dancing on the rock walls. Sata went for snow in a skin bag, melting it in a pot over the fire. Nalin, her face grim, took her knife. She cut away the man's ruined clothes. The work was slow. The fabric was frozen to his wounds. When she peeled the shirt from his shoulder, the blood began to flow sluggishly. He was worse than they thought. The bullet in his chest had gone clean through, but the one in his shoulder was still in there. His skin was the color of ash. Tiva came with her herb bag. She worked with a quiet intensity. She cleaned the wounds with hot water and salt. She ground juniper bark and pine pitch into a thick, black poultice and packed it into the bleeding holes. The smell of the pitch filled the cave. Sharp and clean. They took turns setting his leg. It was a brutal, bloody business. Tiva held his torso. Sata sat on his good leg. And Nalin, her face set like stone, took the shattered limb in her strong hands. She pulled, hard. The man's body arched off the furs, a terrible, silent scream passing his lips. There was a wet, grinding pop as the bones came back into line. Eli Ward passed back into the blackness before he had even left it. Nalin splintered the leg with flat pieces of wood and bound it tight with strips of deer hide. When they were done, the 3 women sat back, exhausted, their hands covered in his blood. He will die, Nalin said, cleaning her knife on a piece of moss. Maybe, Tiva said, wiping her own hands. That is for the spirits to decide. We have done our part. Sata just stared at the man, her expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. For 3 days, he did not wake. The storm raged outside, sealing them in. The wind howled at the mouth of the cave. The women took turns tending him. They forced warm broth of rabbit and bitterroot between his lips. They cleaned his wounds. They listened to his fever dreams, a string of nonsense words and names. Brogan, he said. Once. Don't shoot. Don't. Her. Don't. Tiva bathed his face, her touch gentle. Nalin watched, her arms crossed. Sata stayed as far from him as possible, sharpening her knife over and over. The sound of the stone on the steel a constant, scraping rhythm in the cave. On the 4th day, Eli Ward's eyes opened. He saw, first, a ceiling of rock, lit by a low fire. He smelled smoke and pine and a strange, sweet, earthy scent. He tried to move, and a universe of pain exploded in his leg. He cried out, a dry, cracked sound, and the faces swam into his view. 3 women, Indians. His first thought was that he was dead. These were the spirits who had come to collect him. Then he felt the pain again, and the thirst. Dead men did not hurt. Dead men were not thirsty. He stared. They stared back. One was older, her face hard, her eyes full of suspicion. She held a rifle. One was younger, her eyes wide and dark, full of a pity that almost looked like fear. The third, the youngest, looked at him with a hatred so pure it was a physical thing. She held a knife, and she looked like she knew how to use it. Water, he croaked. The word was dust in his mouth. They did not understand. He tried again, panting from the effort. He made a motion of drinking. The one with the kind eyes, Tiva, seemed to understand. She picked up a small clay bowl and held it to his lips. It was a bitter, warm tea. He drank it greedily. Where? He tried. Who? Nalin said something sharp in her own language. It was a language of clicks and glottal stops, a sound he had only ever heard from a distance, usually followed by gunfire. Tiva spoke, her voice softer. She pointed to herself. Tiva, she pointed to the hard one. Nalin, she pointed to the silent, angry one. Sata. Then she pointed at him. Eli, he managed. Eli Ward. The name meant nothing to them. He was weak, disoriented. He remembered. Nothing. Horses, gunfire, a man's face, bearded and yelling, a woman screaming. But it was a fog, a nightmare he could not grasp. He was in a cave. His leg was on fire. He was a prisoner. The days blurred. The communication was slow, tense. It was a world of gestures. He pointed to his leg, his face a question. Tiva pointed to his chest, then made a sound like a gunshot. Pow! She pointed outside, to the river. They had found him. He understood that. They were feeding him. He understood that, but he did not understand why. He was a white man. They were Apache, in his world, in the Arizona territory of the late 1870s. Those two things did not mix, not peacefully. He kept waiting for the men to return. A husband, a father, a brother. He kept waiting for the knife to be used for something other than cutting his meat. But no men came. It was just the 3 of them. He tried to sit up, but the one called Nalin pushed him back down, her hand on his good shoulder, her face a warning. He was their captive. Then, one night, when the fire was low and the storm had quieted, Tiva sat beside him. Nalin was sleeping. Sata was guarding the entrance, a small, still shadow against the gray light. Tiva spoke softly, in a mix of her language and broken, hesitant English. She had learned some at the agency, before her brother was killed. You, she said, pointing at him. Big hurt. He nodded. Yes. We, she said, pointing to herself, to Nalin, to Sata. We save. Thank you, he said, the words feeling strange. Tiva shook her head. She held up 3 fingers. 3 women, unmarried. She pointed to him again. One man. She made a motion of pulling, of lifting. "We save you from death." "Yes," Eli said, confused. Tiva's face was serious, her eyes searching his in the firelight. She slowly tied the fingers of her two hands together, an unbreakable knot. "Ndi law," she said, her voice a whisper. "Sacred law, a man saved from death by 3 maidens. He owes life bond." Eli stared. He had no idea what she meant. Tiva took a deep breath. She seemed to be searching for the word. "You are sacred. You are ours." She leaned closer, her eyes holding his. "You, husband." Eli's brain, fogged with pain and laudanum-laced tea, tried to process the word. Husband. He let out a weak, dry laugh. "Husband? Me?" He thought it was a joke, a mistake in translation. Tiva did not laugh. Her expression did not change. "It is the law," she said, as if explaining the sunrise. "You are saved. You are bound. You are our husband. Whether you accept or not." The laugh died in Eli's throat. He looked at her dark, serious eyes. He looked at the sleeping form of Nalin, her hand on her rifle. He looked at Sata, a silhouette of anger at the cave's mouth. This was not a joke. This was something else, something deep and old and terrifying. He did not heal quickly. The leg was a mess of splintered bone and torn muscle. The fever came and went, leaving him shaking and slick with sweat. In his helplessness, he had nothing to do but watch. He learned to trust them, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. He was a child, and they were his keepers. And he learned to see their grief. He saw it in Nalin. She was the provider. She would leave in the pre-dawn light and return at dusk, a few rabbits or a squirrel tied to her belt. She never smiled. At night, she would sit by the fire, her hands rubbing the stock of her rifle. Sometimes, Eli would see her staring at the flames, her eyes lost, her jaw so tight he thought her teeth would crack. One night, Tiva sat beside her and put a hand on her arm. Nalin flinched, as if struck, and then her whole body began to shake. She did not make a sound, but her shoulders heaved, a storm of grief passing through her. He saw it in Tiva. She was the healer. She tended his wounds, her hands gentle but firm. She fed him, humming low, sad songs. Her songs were always about the mountains, about the eagle, about a brother who had gone to the stars. When she thought Eli was asleep, he would see her hold a small, carved piece of wood to her chest, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Her brother, he pieced together, the treaty paper, the lie. Her sadness was not hard, like Nalin's. It was a soft, deep ache, a river that ran through her. And he saw it in Sata. Her grief was the most frightening. It was a living, breathing thing. It was a rage that had burned away her words. She would sit for hours, staring at the cave wall, her hands clenched into fists. If Eli moved too suddenly, she would flinch, a sharp, violent motion, and her hand would fly to her knife. She hated him. He was a man, and he was white. He was the enemy she could not kill, sleeping on her furs, eating her food. Tiva had tried to explain it. "Miners," she had whispered, her face pained. "White men, digging, gold." She made a gesture of violence, of tearing. No talk, no more. He was surrounded by their pain. It was in the air he breathed. At night, the small cave became a tinderbox of unspoken things. The firelight flickered, making the shadows long and strange. The tension was so thick he could taste it. He was a man. They were women. They were unmarried. And according to their law, he was their husband. He was acutely aware of them. The smell of their skin, a scent of wood smoke and pine, the sound of their breathing as they slept, the way Nalin would shift, her body taut even in rest, the way Tiva would sigh, a sound of profound weariness, the way Sata would whimper, small, animal sounds in the deep of the night. He started to dream. His own nightmares mingled with the tension in the cave. He would see flashes of the ambush, a narrow canyon, the sun hot on the rocks, the sudden crack of a rifle, his horse screaming, a man's face, bearded, with cold blue eyes. Captain Brogan. The name surfaced from his memory, and the woman, a woman screaming. Not one of the Apache women, a different woman. Was she there, or was it just a sound? He would wake up, his heart pounding, his body slick with sweat. The three women would be awake, too, watching him. He started to suspect this was not just a random attack. He was not just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Someone had tried to kill him. Someone wanted him dead, and they might still be looking. The thought terrified him. He was not just a burden on these women. He was a danger. One night, he decided he had to leave. He was stronger. He could sit up. His leg was a fiery, dull ache. But the infection had receded. Thanks to Tiva's foul-tasting teas, he waited. He listened to the breathing of the women settle into the rhythm of sleep. Nalin was by the fire, Tiva and Sata near the back wall. He had hidden a thick branch, a piece of firewood, under his furs. He pulled it out, using it as a crutch. He slowly, painfully, pulled himself up. The movement sent daggers of fire up his leg. He bit his lip to keep from crying out. He stood, unsteadily, leaning on the branch. The cave spun for a moment. He took one step. His leg, the one that had been shattered, gave out completely. It folded under him like wet paper. He went down hard, crashing onto the stone floor, the branch clattering beside him. He landed on his wounded shoulder, and a sharp, guttural cry was ripped from his throat. Before the sound had even faded, she was on him. Nalin moved like a panther. In a second, she was kneeling on his chest, her weight pinning him to the ground. In her hand was her knife. The blade pressed hard against the side of his throat. He felt the cold steel break the skin. A warm trickle of his own blood ran down his neck. Her face was inches from his. In the dying light of the fire, her eyes were black pools of fury. She was shaking with a rage so profound it stunned him. She was not just angry, she was terrified. "You fool!" she hissed. The English words spat at him like stones. "You stupid, white fool!" He lay still, breathing hard, the knife at his throat. "Where do you go?" she demanded, her voice low and shaking. "To die in the snow, to lead the soldiers to us, to leave us with your debt?" He did not understand. "Debt? You were saved," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You were taken from the river. You owe a life. You do not get to throw it away." She pressed the knife harder. "If you leave, the spirits will follow. You are bound to us. Your life is not yours. It is ours, to pay for what we did." He stared into her furious, shaken eyes. He saw her lost parents. He saw Tiva's dead brother. He saw Sata's stolen voice. He was not her prisoner. He was her penance. "Do not," Nalin whispered, her breath hot on his face. "Ever try to leave again, you will not die. White man, not until we are finished with you." She took the knife from his throat, stood up, and walked back to the fire. Her back rigid. Eli lay on the cold stone, his leg throbbing, his shoulder screaming, a line of blood cooling on his neck. He looked at the shadows on the wall, and, for the first time, he understood. He was not going anywhere. After the night Nalin's blade tasted the air at his throat, Eli understood. His life was not his own. The cold steel had pressed a new reality into his skin. He was not a prisoner, not a guest, and not a joke. He was a debt. He was a sacred burden. He began to accept that leaving was not an option. The world outside, the world of snow and wind, was a death sentence. The world inside the cave was a complicated, breathing, and dangerous life. But it was life. His days fell into a new rhythm, marked not by the sun, which he could not see, but by the women's movements. He learned their names by heart, saying them over in his mind. Nalin, the hunter, the blade, the fury. Tiva, the healer, the heart, the prayer. Saita, the shadow, the silence, the pain. He learned their stories not in words, but in the spaces between them. He learned Nalin's story in the hard, efficient way she butchered a rabbit, her knuckles white, her jaw set, as if every cut was a small act of vengeance. He learned Tiva's story in the careful, almost loving way she sorted her herbs, whispering to the dried leaves as she ground them, her touch gentle on things that were broken. He learned Sata's story in the absolute stillness she maintained, a stillness that was not peace, but a loaded gun, her eyes following the fire, seeing things that were not there. His leg began to mend. The sharp, blinding pain settled into a deep, throbbing ache. The women, in an act of stark practicality, built him a cane. Nalin had found a sturdy, cured piece of juniper. Tiva had sanded the handle smooth with a piece of sandstone. Sata, in a surprising, quick movement, had wrapped the bottom in a piece of rawhide to keep it from slipping on the rock. It was the first thing she had done for him, rather than just near him. When the storm finally broke, after 8 days, Tiva pointed to the cane and then to the cave mouth. "Walk," she said. Nalin helped him to his feet. Her touch was not gentle. It was firm, impatient, like hauling a sack of grain. "You are not a baby. Use the leg, or lose it." He leaned on the cane, his first steps a fire of agony. The leg was stiff, weak, the muscle withered, but he gritted his teeth and moved. He followed Tiva's slow, deliberate pace to the mouth of the cave. When he pushed aside the heavy, frozen hide that covered the entrance, the light was a physical blow. It was morning. The world was a blinding, pristine white. The snow had covered everything, smoothing the hard edges of the mountains into soft, rolling drifts. The air was so cold and clean it burned his lungs. After weeks in the smoky, close air of the cave, it was like being born again. He stood there, leaning on his cane, and wept. He did not make a sound, but the tears froze instantly on his bruised cheeks. Tiva stood beside him, her face turned toward the sun, her eyes closed. She said nothing. From that day, they took him outside. They taught him. He thought he knew how to survive in the wild. He knew how to ride, how to shoot, how to track a steer. He knew nothing. Nalin taught him to make a fire. Not a white man's fire, a big, blazing, stupid thing that shouted, "Here I am. Come kill me." She taught him the Apache way, a small fire, a smokeless fire, built in a pit, using dry wood. So small you could hide it with your hat. "Smoke is a letter," she told him, her English broken but sharp. "It tells soldiers, it tells enemy. No smoke, no talk." Tiva taught him about the plants. This one, the Asha root, for his lungs. This one, the flat-leafed plant, for a poultice. This one, the small red berry, was death. "The mountain gives all," she said, her hands in the snow, digging for a frozen root. "Life and death. You must see, not just look." Even Sata taught him. In her silence, he watched her set snares for rabbits, her thin, strong fingers moving with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. She was a creature of the mountain, a part of the snow and the rock. He was a clumsy, broken thing, a different species. And with this new, forced intimacy, something else began to grow in the cave. It was an awareness, a tension that was as thick and unspoken as the grief. It was in the way his eyes would meet Tiva's over the fire. She would look away, a faint flush on her high cheekbones. It was in the simple, necessary act of passing a water skin. Tiva's fingers would brush his, a touch as light as a moth's wing, and he would feel it all the way up his arm. He would see Nalin watching, her eyes narrowing. It was in the night. The cave was small. They slept close, for warmth. He was aware of every breath they took, of the scent of their hair, of the way the firelight caught the curve of Nalin's shoulder or the line of Tiva's throat. He was a man. They were women. They were his saviors. They were his jailers. They were, by their own law, his wives. The thought was a madness, but it was there, hovering in the smoke. They all tried to resist it. It was unspoken. It was dangerous. He would catch himself watching the line of Tiva's neck and would immediately look down, his heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and guilt. Nalin was the most resistant. She grew colder, her voice sharper. If he was too close, she would move away. If he spoke, she would ignore him. She was building a wall, and she was building it high. One afternoon, he was trying to help Tiva grind roots. His hand, clumsy, knocked hers, spilling the powder. "I'm sorry," he said, trying to help her scoop it up. Their hands touched in the dust. "Do not!" Naleen's voice snapped from the back of the cave. They both froze. "Do not touch her," Naleen said, walking into the firelight. "It was an accident," Eli said, his voice quiet. "There are no accidents here," Naleen said, her eyes black. "You are a white man. She is Ende. You are oil. She is water. Do not mix." She grabbed the grinding stone from Tiva and shoved it at Eli. "You want to help? Help, but keep your hands to yourself. Your touch is a curse." She turned and left the cave, her back rigid. Tiva would not look at him for the rest of the day. The tension, his healing leg, the feverish dreams of the ambush, it all began to churn in his mind. One night, he pushed himself too hard, trying to haul firewood, wanting to prove his worth, wanting to silence Naleen's contempt. He slipped on the ice, and the pain in his leg was a white-hot explosion. He barely made it back to the cave, sweat pouring from him, his teeth chattering. The fever hit him like a train. His leg was on fire, the old wounds aching. The infection, which had been sleeping, had awakened. He fell into the darkness, and the memories came. He was not in a cave. He was in Texas. The sun was a hammer. The dust was thick, tasting of alkali and sweat. He was riding with Marshal Jedediah Pike, a good man, a fair man. They had been tracking a land baron, a man named Harrison, for 6 months, a man who stole land, who diverted water, who hired gunmen to burn out homesteaders. They had him. They had the proof. They had 2 of his men, ready to talk, and then the soldiers had shown up, a full company, led by a captain with cold blue eyes, Captain Brogan. "This is military jurisdiction. Marshal," Brogan had said, his voice smooth, his hand on his revolver. "Mr. Harrison is a vital contractor for the United States Army. These men are under my protection." Pike, who had seen too much, had tried to argue. Brogan had just smiled. "We'll take your prisoners." "They're not prisoners," Eli had said, his own hand on his gun. "They're witnesses." "They're whatever I say they are, son." The standoff had ended. Pike had been forced to back down. But Eli, young and full of righteous fire, had followed. He had found Brogan's camp. He had listened. And he had heard Brogan giving the order to his sergeant. "Take the prisoners out, the ones who talked, and the marshal's men. If you see him, no witnesses. Sergeant, none." Eli had run. He had found Pike. "They're going to kill them. Jed, they're unarmed." They had ridden hard. 2 men against a company. They had found them in a dry wash. The 2 witnesses, their hands bound, on their knees. Brogan's sergeant was raising his rifle. "No!" Pike had yelled. Riding down into the wash, the world had exploded in gunfire. Eli remembered shooting, but not at the men, at the sky, at the rocks, refusing to shoot unarmed prisoners. The words came back to him. It was his own voice, screaming at Pike. Pike had gone down, a bullet in his chest. Eli had been shot from his horse. He remembered the pain, the dirt in his mouth. He remembered Brogan, standing over him, the sun behind his head, making him a black, faceless shape. "You should have stayed in Texas, boy," Brogan's voice had echoed. He remembered a boot to his face, and a woman's scream. Whose scream? Where did that come from? He had been left for dead. He and Pike, but he had not died. He had crawled. He had found a horse, or a horse had found him. He had ridden north, into the territories, trying to get to... where? To Fort Grant? To a lawman? He had just run, and they had found him. The ambush by the river. It was not a random attack. It was Brogan's men. They were cleaning up the last witness. They were tying off the last loose end. He realized it with a certainty that was as cold as the snow outside. Whoever shot him might still be looking for him. He was not just a burden. He was a magnet for death. And he was hiding in a cave with 3 women who had no part in his fight. He had brought the wolf to their door. He woke up, shouting, "Brogan!" His body was on fire. He was soaked, but not in sweat. In cold water. He was naked. The shock of it cut through the fever dream. He was lying on the furs, and his clothes were gone. The cave was dark, lit only by the faint red glow of the dying embers. A rainstorm was raging outside. The sound a dull roar at the cave's entrance. He tried to sit up, but a hand pressed him back down. "Be still," a voice whispered. Tiva. She was beside him, a wet cloth in her hand. She was wiping his chest, his arms, his face. The water was icy, shocking his hot skin. "Fever," she whispered. "Too much. Must cool." He was vulnerable, exposed. He could see the outline of her body as she knelt beside him. He was a naked man. She was a woman. They were alone in the dark. He was too weak to be afraid, too weak to be ashamed. She worked with a clinical, detached purpose. She bathed his burning skin, her touch light, impersonal. She did not look at his face. She focused on her work. When she was done, she did not move. She did not cover him. She sat on the rock floor beside the furs. He lay there, breathing in the cold, damp air, his skin pimpling. The fever was breaking. He could feel it receding, like a tide going out. Tiva rested beside him. She did not touch him. She just sat, her knees drawn up, her arms resting on them. He could hear her breathing, soft and steady. Then he heard her voice, a whisper, so low he almost thought it was the rain. She was praying. She was whispering in her own language, the words a soft, sibilant song. It was a prayer, a chant, a plea. He did not understand a single word, but he understood the intent. She was praying for him, for his spirit, for his life. He lay there, naked and weak, listening to the Apache woman pray for his white man's soul. And he felt a wave of something so profound it almost broke him. It was not desire. It was gratitude. It was a connection that went deeper than skin, deeper than language. He fell asleep, not into the darkness of fever, but into a true, healing rest. When he woke, the sun was trying to shine. The rain had stopped. He was covered in furs, and his leg ached, but the fever was gone. He saw Tiva across the cave, sleeping, her face pale with exhaustion. Nalin was by the fire, sharpening her knife, her movements sharp and angry. She heard him stir. She looked up, her eyes black. "You are a weak thing," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Like a baby. She sits with you. She prays. She does not sleep. For you." Eli said nothing. He had no defense. "You make her soft." Nalin spat. "You make us all soft. We are not soft people. White man, the soft ones are dead. They are on the reservation, eating worms from the flower. We are hard. We survive." She stood up and walked over to him. She kicked the furs. "Get up. Your fever is gone. You are not dying today." She pointed to the wood pile. "Chop or freeze." Tiva stirred, her eyes opening, alarmed. "Nalin, no, his leg. He is weak." "He is a man," Nalin said, not looking at Tiva. "Let him act like one. He will not be a child in my house." She threw his clothes at him. They were damp, but clean. Tiva had washed them. Eli dressed, his hands shaking. He stood, using his cane. His legs screamed in protest. He walked to the small pile of wood. He picked up the hatchet. He spent the morning trying to chop wood. It was a pathetic, humiliating display. He had to balance on his one good leg, using the cane for support. His swings were weak, the hatchet glancing off the tough, cured wood. Nalin watched him. She did not help. She did not mock. She just watched, her arms crossed, her face a mask of stone. He would chop for a minute, then have to sit, his body trembling with weakness. His leg felt like it was full of broken glass. But he did not stop. He thought of her words. He is a man. Let him act like one. He thought of Tiva, praying for him in the dark. He gritted his teeth, stood up, and swung the axe. A small chip of wood flew off. He swung again. He worked until the sun was high, and he had a small pile of split kindling. He was covered in sweat, and his leg was throbbing so hard he could barely see. He finally collapsed by the fire, exhausted. Nalin watched him, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, but later that afternoon, when Tiva brought him a bowl of hot broth, he saw Nalin watching him from the shadows. Her face was still hard, but her eyes, for just a second, had lost their sharp edge. There was something else there. Not softness, but a flicker of something close to it. A grudging respect. She refused to admit, even to herself, that his stubbornness, his refusal to stay weak, was growing on her. The next day, Eli was outside, sitting on a rock, letting the weak sun hit his face. He saw Sata. She was alone, at the edge of the clearing, far from the cave. She was squatting, her back to him, scratching in the dirt with a long, thin stick. He was curious. He stood, wincing, and used his cane to walk toward her. He moved quietly. He did not want to startle her. He got within 10 feet of her. She was completely absorbed in what she was doing. He looked past her shoulder, at the dirt. It was a drawing. It was crude, made of stick figures, but it was unmistakable. There were 3, 4, 5 tall figures. Men. They had hats. There was a smaller figure, on the ground. A woman. Her. There were lines all around them. Fire. And dark. Angry scratches in the dirt. Blood. His stomach turned to ice. He had known, in his mind, what Tiva had meant. Miners, white men, violence. But seeing it, drawn in the dirt by the hand of the girl who had lived it, was a different thing. It was a punch to the gut. He saw the men, the fire, the blood, and the small, broken figure on the ground. "Sata?" he whispered. The name was barely a breath. She reacted as if he had shot her. She screamed, a high, thin, scraping sound. The first sound he had ever heard her make. It was a sound of pure terror. She whirled around, her eyes wide, seeing not him, Eli, but the ghosts from her drawing. She saw him. She saw his face, his white face. Her expression changed from terror to a bottomless, burning hatred. She shrieked again and began scrubbing the drawing with her feet, destroying the images, kicking up dirt and snow, as if trying to erase the memory itself. Then she turned and ran. She scrambled up the rocks, away from the cave, away from him, moving like a frantic, wounded animal, until she was gone. Eli stood there, his heart like a stone in his chest. He looked at the meaningless, scrubbed patch of dirt. He saw the face of Captain Brogan. He saw the miners. He saw his own skin. "Your touch is a curse." Nalin's words came back to him. He had never felt more like a monster. He was sitting by the fire that night, the cave silent, the tension thick and poisonous. Sata had not returned. Nalin and Tiva were out looking for her. He felt responsible. He felt useless. Tiva and Nalin returned just after dark, dragging Sata between them. She was not hurt, but she was limp, her spirit gone. Her face, once again, a frozen mask. Nalin shot Eli a look that could have killed. He looked away, ashamed. Later, after Sata was asleep, curled in her furs, Tiva came and sat near him. The fire was low. "It is not you," she whispered. He looked at her. "It is my face, my skin." "It is them," she said. "The men, not you." "It feels like me," he said, his voice rough. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was Sata's breathing, quick and shallow. A nightmare sleep. Tiva began to hum. It was a low, simple tune, a sad tune, but a gentle one. It was a song. He realized that she hummed when she worked, when she sorted her herbs. "What is that?" he asked. "A song," she said, "for sleeping. My mother sang it. For my brother. It's beautiful," he said. "It is for children, for spirits, to tell them, you are safe. The night is watching. Sleep." He listened. The simple, repetitive melody was calming. "Teach me," he said, the words surprising him. Tiva looked at him, her eyes wide. "Teach me," he said again. "The sound. I do not need the words." She hummed it again, slowly. He tried. His voice was a low, rough rumble. He was clumsy, she corrected him, her own voice soft, guiding. They hummed together, their voices a strange harmony in the cave. The fire crackled. Nalin watched them from the shadows, her face unreadable. The next night, the tension was still there. Sata was still silent, still a shadow. She sat as far from Eli as she could, her back to him. Eli felt a pull. He looked at Tiva. She nodded. Once. He took a breath. He began to sing. It was not a hum. He sang the melody, softly, his voice rough. He did not have the words. So he used a low, open sound. The sound filled the cave. Sata froze. Nalin stopped her work. Tiva closed her eyes. He sang the simple, sad lullaby that Tiva had taught him. He sang it for the brother she had lost. He sang it for the parents Nalin missed. He sang it for the voice Sata could not find. He sang it for himself, for the lawman. Pike, he had lost. He finished. The silence that followed was different. It was not an angry silence. It was a heavy, thoughtful one. Sata slowly turned around. She looked at him. Her eyes were not full of hate. They were full of a vast, empty sadness. She did not move for a long time. Then, in a motion so small he almost missed it, she stood up. She crossed the small space of the cave. She sat down on the ground, near his good leg. She did not look at him. She stared at the fire, but she was there. Eli's heart was pounding. He looked at her small, thin hand, resting on her knee. Her knuckles were white. Slowly, so slowly, he thought his muscles would cramp. He reached out his own hand. He rested it on the ground, near hers. He waited. Then, he gently, carefully, laid his hand over hers. She flinched. Her whole body went rigid. He expected her to scream, to pull away, to bite him. He held his breath. She did not move. He held her hand. It was small, cold, and trembling, but she did not pull away. The fragile peace, woven from lullabies and held hands, lasted only as long as the next hunter's moon. It was broken by a visitor. She was an old woman, a distant cousin of their mother's, who lived with a small, hidden band of Chiricahua 3 canyons over. She arrived at dusk, her face a web of wrinkles and worry. And she did not come for social talk. She accepted a bowl of water from Tiva but refused food. She spoke to Nalin in low, rapid Apache, her eyes constantly darting to Eli, who sat by the fire, his leg now strong enough to bear his weight for short periods. He understood nothing of her words, but he understood her tone. It was the sound of fear. He understood the sharp, quick glances in his direction. He was the subject. He was the problem. After a few minutes, the old woman stood, her joints cracking. She placed a gnarled hand on Tiva's arm, said a final, grave word, and then melted back into the shadows she had come from. The silence she left behind was heavy, cold, and absolute. Sata had her back to them, but she was rigid. Tiva was staring into the fire, her lips pale. Nalin, however, was staring at Eli. Her face was a mask of cold, familiar anger. "What is it?" Eli asked. He was used to their silences, but this one was different. This one had teeth. Tiva looked at Nalin. Nalin spat into the fire. "She says, 'Men,'" Tiva began, her voice barely a whisper. "White men, with guns. They are in the hills, near the old agency." Eli's blood went cold. He set down the piece of wood he was carving. "Soldiers?" "No." Nalin's voice was sharp. "Not soldiers. Not with uniforms." She looked at him, her eyes narrowing to slits. "They ask about a cowboy, a man who escaped." Tiva translated the last word. Escaped justice. Eli felt the floor of the cave drop out from under him. Brogan. It had to be. They had not given up. They were still hunting him. And now they were here, in these mountains, in the heart of Apache territory. He had led them here. "They are asking questions," Tiva continued, her voice trembling. "Offering gold for a man with a bad leg, a man shot in the shoulder." Eli looked down at his own splintered leg, at the puckered, scarred skin on his shoulder. "She says," Nalin cut in, her voice like ice, "that her people will not be safe. She says the white men are angry. They say the man is a thief, a killer. They say any Indian who hides him will burn." The words hung in the air. Will burn. He remembered the stories of the cavalry raids, the bodies left by the creek. Nalin's parents. "What else did she say?" Eli asked, his voice low. Tiva would not look at him. Nalin walked over to him, her shadow falling over him, blocking the fire. "She said, we must give you up." Tiva gasped. "Nalin, she did not say that. She said we must be careful. She said we should run, go deeper." "And I say we give him up." Nalin's voice was a raw shout. It echoed in the small cave. Sata flinched, her whole body tensing. "He is one man," Nalin went on, her hand gripping the knife at her belt. "One white man. Our people, Tiva, our people are starving at San Carlos. Our cousins are hiding in these rocks, afraid to make a fire. And for what? For him? For this ghost who brings his own hunters to our door? He is our sacred husband," Tiva said, her voice small but firm. "It is the law. We cannot—" "Law?" Nalin laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "What law is there for us? The white man's law that shoots your brother under a white flag? The miner's law that—" She stopped, cutting herself off, her eyes flicking to Sata. "There is no law. There is only survival. He is a sickness, and he will kill us all." Eli stood up. He used his cane, but his good leg was shaking. "She's right," he said. Tiva and Nalin both froze, looking at him. "She's right," he said again, his voice thick. "I am a sickness. I am a danger. I never should have. I never wanted to bring this to you." He looked at Tiva. "I am not your husband. I am a white man, running." He looked at Nalin. "You will not have to give me up. I will go." "Eli, no!" Tiva whispered, starting to stand. "It is my fight," he said, his voice hardening. "My past. They are hunting me. Not you. I will lead them away. I will go north." "You are a fool," Nalin said, her voice flat. "You cannot walk 10 miles. Your leg is weak. The snow is deep. You will die, and they will find your body, and they will know we were here." "Then I will die far from here," he said. He turned and went to the back of the cave, to the small pile of furs that had been his bed. He sat, his back to them, and began to wrap his feet in extra strips of hide, preparing for the cold. The debate was over. He had listened to them argue over his life as if he were a piece of meat. He would not be their burden, and he would not be their curse. He waited until the deepest part of the night. He waited until the breathing in the cave had evened out, until Nalin's restless turning had stopped, until Tiva's soft sighs had faded into true sleep. Sata, as always, was a silent, still lump in the darkness. He had prepared. He had a small bundle, his cane, a pouch of Tiva's dried meat, a skin of water, and the hatchet. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough, but it was what he had. He stood, the movement slow, agonizing. His leg ached in the cold, a deep, bone-felt protest. He listened. Nothing, just the sound of the wind outside. He took a step, leaning on the cane. The rawhide Sata had wrapped on the bottom made it almost silent on the stone floor. Another step. He was past the fire pit, the embers a faint red eye in the dark. He was at the cave mouth. He gently, so gently, pushed aside the heavy hide. The cold hit him in the face. 1,000,000 stars were scattered across a black, frozen sky. The moon was a sliver, giving just enough light to see the white, blue-shadowed snow. He took a deep breath of the free, freezing air. He took one step out onto the ledge. "No!" The word was a puff of smoke in the dark. It was quiet. It was small. It was not Nalin's sharp command. It was not Tiva's soft plea. He froze. He turned. Sata was standing right behind him, not 3 feet away. She was just a shadow, barefoot in the snow, her thin shift moving in the wind. He had not heard her. She had followed him like a ghost. He thought he had imagined it. It was the first word he had ever heard her speak. It was rusty, cracked, unused. "Sata," he whispered. "Stay." She said it again. The word was stronger this time. It was not a plea. It was not an order. It was a statement. "Stay." She was staring at him, her face a pale oval in the starlight. He could not read her expression. He looked out at the vast, cold, empty mountains, a world of white, waiting to kill him. He looked back at the shadow in the cave mouth. He was a dead man either way. But her word, that one word, had pulled him back. It was an anchor. He had been running from his past. He had been running to save them. And the one who had seen the worst, the one who had every right to hate him, had just told him to stay. He let out a breath he did not know he was holding. It turned into a cloud of white. He felt the strength, the righteous anger that had fueled his escape, drain out of him, leaving him weak and shaking. He nodded. Once. He turned and limped back into the cave. She followed him and pulled the hide closed, sealing them in the darkness together. He did not go back to his furs. He sat by the fire pit and poked the embers with a stick, bringing a few small, hesitant flames back to life. Sata sat across from him, her knees drawn up, watching him. The firelight grew, and he saw Tiva was awake. She was sitting up, watching them. And then Nalin, who had not been asleep at all, sat up too. They were all there. The jury was back. "You are a fool. Eli Ward," Nalin said, her voice not angry, but weary. A deep, bone-weary sound. "I know," he said, not looking up from the flames. "Why?" Tiva asked, her voice soft. "Why would you leave us? You know what the law says." "Because of what your sister says," Eli answered, his voice rough. "Because I am a sickness. I am a white man, and I have brought my white man's trouble to you. They are hunting me. They will not stop, and they will not care who they hurt to find me." "Who?" Tiva asked. "Who is hunting you?" Eli looked at the three faces in the firelight. Nalin, hard and judging. Tiva, soft and questioning. Sata, silent and watching. He had not spoken of this to anyone. Not a soul. Jedediah Pike was dead. There was no one else. He had been holding it in, the guilt, the fear, the shame. It had been eating him alive, a poison worse than the fever. And now, in this cave, surrounded by three women who were as broken as he was, it all came pouring out. He broke. He put his head in his hands, and his shoulders began to shake. He did not weep, not with tears, but with the dry, racking sobs that tore at his throat. "His name is Brogan," he choked out. "Captain Brogan." He told them everything. He told them about Texas, about working with Marshal Pike. He told them about the land baron, Harrison, and his connections to the army. "He was selling them rotten beef," Eli said, his voice cracking. "He was selling them guns, and those guns were ending up, well, they were ending up." He told them about the standoff, about the witnesses, the two men who had agreed to talk. "They were unarmed," he whispered, the memory of fresh hell. "They were on their knees. Pike, he told me to hold my fire. But Brogan's sergeant, he just raised his rifle. Pike rode in. They shot him down. They shot him down like a dog." He lifted his head, his face slick with sweat, his eyes burning. "They told me to shoot. Brogan's men. They yelled at me to shoot the prisoners. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. They were unarmed. They were just men. So I shot, but I shot wide. I shot at the rocks." He rubbed his face, his hands shaking. "Brogan saw. He knew. After it was over, they left me. They shot me. My horse. They beat me. Brogan stood over me. He said I should have stayed in Texas." He looked at Tiva. "I ran. I just ran. I don't even know how I got here. I stole a horse. I think I killed a man. I don't remember. I just ran." He looked at Nalin. "So, you are right. I am not just a cowboy. I am a deserter. A man who disobeyed orders. A man who saw a United States Army captain commit murder. And that man, Brogan, he is not a man who leaves a witness. He wants me dead. And he will not care how many Apache women he has to kill to make it happen." He finished. The confession lay in the middle of the cave, ugly and raw. The silence that followed was absolute. Sata had not moved. Nalin was staring at him, her face impossible to read. Tiva was crying. Slowly, she stood up. She crossed the fire. She knelt in front of him. He was still looking down, ashamed, empty. She put her hand on his cheek. It was trembling. "You are a good man, Eli Ward," she whispered. He looked up, his eyes full of pain. "I ran, Tiva. I left Pike to die. You lived," she said, her voice fierce, tears running down her face. "You lived. You did not shoot. You did not become them." He stared at her dark, tear-filled eyes. He saw her lost brother, her grief, and she was looking at him, not with pity, but with a deep, aching understanding. She saw his pain. She was not afraid of it. She leaned in, and her lips touched his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, trembling, and full of salt. It was the taste of her tears, and his. It was a kiss of shared grief, a raw, fumbling, human act in the face of so much death. It was a spark of life in a cold, dark place. The kiss lasted only a second, but it changed the air in the cave. It broke when Nalin stood up, the sound of her moccasins on the stone like a gunshot. Tiva pulled back, her face flushed, her eyes wide with what she had done. Nalin was standing in the shadows, just outside the ring of fire. She was trembling. Eli could see it. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She was furious. Her eyes were on Tiva, then on Eli, then on Tiva again. But as Eli watched her, he saw something else beneath the fury. It was not just anger. It was conflict. It was a deep, burning jealousy. She was furious with them, but she was also furious with herself, because in that moment, as she watched her sister kiss the white man, she knew, to her deepest shame, that she had wanted to do the same. She turned, her back to them, and stalked to the mouth of the cave, where she stood, a rigid sentinel, staring out at the snow. The days that followed were a new kind of tension. The air was charged. Nalin would not speak to Tiva, and she would not look at Eli. Tiva was quiet, her face full of guilt and a new, strange tenderness. Eli felt changed. The confession had emptied him, but the kiss had filled him with something new, a warmth, a terrifying, complicated warmth. Sata was the only one who seemed unaffected. She had made her choice. The change came 3 days after the kiss. Eli woke up, as he always did, to the cold, but the cold was different. There was a warmth pressed against his chest, a weight. He opened his eyes. In the pre-dawn gray, he saw a tangle of black hair. Sata. She was asleep, curled on his chest, her head tucked under his chin. She was small, light as a bird, her breathing deep and even. She was curled against him like a child seeking comfort from a nightmare. He lay perfectly still. He was terrified to move. She had come to him in the night, in her sleep, or in a waking decision, and had chosen him. He, the white man, the source of her trauma, was now her safe harbor. The trust of it was so profound, so absolute. It broke his heart. He heard a sound. He looked up. Nalin was standing over them, her arms full of firewood. She was staring down at the two of them. Her face was stone. She put the wood down, very quietly. She walked over to him, so she was kneeling beside his head. She leaned in, her voice a whisper, so low it would not wake the sleeping girl. Her voice was not angry. It was not hot. It was cold, cold as the river, cold as the grave. "White man," she whispered. You listen to me." He met her eyes. Nalin nodded at Sata, "is broken. Tiva is a fool for spirits, and I am all that is left to protect them." "If you touch them," she whispered, her eyes burning into his. "If you touch any of them without honor, I will not tell you to leave. I will not send you to the soldiers." She leaned closer, her breath smelling of bitter root and smoke. "I will take my knife. I will cut you, and I will bury the pieces so deep in these mountains that not even your own white god will ever find your soul." She stared at him for a long, hard second, to be sure he understood. He understood. This was not a jealous threat. This was a sacred promise. He nodded. Once. "Good," she whispered. She stood up, her face a mask once more, and turned to the fire. Eli lay there, the warm, trusting weight of Sata on his chest, the chill of Nahleen's promise on his skin. He was trapped. Later that day, after Sata had woken and, with a small, embarrassed sound, had scrambled away, Eli knew he had to act. He found Nahleen and Tiva by the spring, breaking ice to get to the water. Sata was a short distance away, checking her snares. "Nahleen," he said. She did not turn around. "You spoke to me this morning," he said, his voice firm. "About honor." Nahleen stopped, her hand halfway to the water. She stood up, slowly, and faced him. "I need to know," he said. "What does it mean? What is this honor? You call me husband. You say I am bound. What does it mean?" Tiva looked at Nahleen, her face pale. Nahleen held his gaze. "It is not your honor, white man. It is ours." "Then tell me," he said, his voice raw. "Tell me what I am. Tell me what I am supposed to be." Tiva stepped forward, her voice low. "The law is old, Eli. It is from the first times, when the world was new." She took a deep breath. "A sacred husband, a man saved by three, has one life, to protect, to provide, to never, ever abandon." He looked at the three of them. "A hunter, a healer, a ghost." "Protect you?" he said. "I cannot even protect myself. I'm a cripple. Provide? I eat your food. I'm a burden." "You are healing," Tiva insisted. "You are strong, and never abandon." He looked at Nahleen. "You want me gone. You said so yourself." "What I want," Nahleen said, her voice tight, "is for my sisters to be safe. So that is the price," Eli said. "I protect you. I provide. I stay." Tiva nodded. "And in return?" he asked, the question hanging in the cold air. Tiva looked at Nahleen, then back at Eli. Her face was serious, her eyes unblinking. "In return," she said, her voice clear, "you share our fire, you share our food, and you share our body." Eli stared. He had known, but hearing it said, so plain, so clear, it was a business transaction, a spiritual one, a physical one. "It is one life, Eli," Tiva said, pleading. "We are bound to you. Your soul is tied to ours. We guard it. You guard us." They asked him to choose. He saw the three of them. Nahleen, her hand on her knife, her heart buried under a mountain of anger. Tiva, her soul open, her heart soft, her body trembling from a single, desperate kiss. Sata, watching from the rocks, a broken bird, her hand in his, and he looked at himself. Eli Ward, a man who ran, a man who was hunted. "Choose," Nahleen said, her voice flat. "Be what the spirits demand, or be what you are, a white man, and go." He looked at their faces. 3 women. He had to choose. "I can't," he said, the words tearing out of him. Tiva's face fell. "I can't," he said again, louder, desperation creeping into his voice. "Do you not understand? I am one man. I cannot belong to 3 women." He was a man from Texas, a man of one God, one law. This was not his world. This was not his law. His refusal was a slap. He saw it in Tiva's eyes. The light, the warmth she had shown him. It just went out. She turned her back to him. Her shoulders slumped. She had offered him her soul, her law, her body, and he had said no. Nahleen just nodded, a grim, satisfied look on her face. She had expected this. She had known. He was a white man. He was weak. He was a liar. She turned and walked away. He was left alone. Standing by the broken ice, he had failed. He had refused their law. He had broken the one bond that was keeping him alive. He was alone. He stood there for a long time. Then he heard a sound, a small pebble, dislodged. He looked up. Sada. She was walking toward him. Nalin and Tiva were gone. Back to the cave. Back to their world. A world he had just been cast out of. But Sata was walking toward him. She stopped, 10 feet away, her eyes on his. She did not look angry. She did not look hurt. She just looked. Then she turned and began walking, not toward the cave, but toward the ridge, to check her snares. After a few steps, she stopped. She looked back at him. It was not a question. It was not a command. It was just a look, and he understood. He picked up his cane, and his legs screaming. He followed. She was not turning away from him. She was the only one. The winter deepened, driving its teeth into the mountains. The wind was a constant, high-pitched scream, and the snow, which had once been a white blanket, was now a prison of deep, icy drifts. The world shrank to the dimensions of the cave. The air inside was thick with wood smoke, the smell of drying herbs, and a tension that was suffocating. Eli's refusal to accept the sacred bond had changed nothing and had broken everything. He was still there, his leg healing, his strength returning. But the fragile connection he had forged with Tiva was gone, replaced by a polite, aching sadness. She still tended to him, but her eyes were veiled, her touch purely clinical. Nalin was exactly as she had always been, cold, sharp, and impatient. Only now, her coldness held a bitter edge of vindication. She had known he was a coward, and he had proven her right. Only Sata remained. She was his shadow. Where he sat, she sat, 10 feet away. When he limped to the spring for water, she followed, her small spear in hand, watching the rocks above. She did not speak, she did not touch him, but she was there, a silent, devoted, and constant guard. Her loyalty, which he had not earned and could not understand, was a heavy weight on his conscience. He was an island of one, with a single, silent inhabitant. The routine was broken by the return of the old woman. She came during a blizzard, appearing at the cave mouth like a ghost, covered in ice. Tiva's name was a croak on her frozen lips. They pulled her in, wrapped her in furs, and gave her hot tea. This time, she was not just worried. She was terrified. Her hands, which she held to the fire, would not stop shaking. She spoke for a long time, her voice a low, urgent torrent of Apache. Nalin and Tiva listened, their faces growing harder, paler. When the old woman finished, she looked at Eli. It was a look of profound, weary hatred. She spat on the floor near his feet, stood, and, refusing their offer to stay, vanished back into the storm. The three women were alone, and Eli, who had not understood a word, felt the executioner's axe hanging over his head. "Tiva," he asked, his voice hoarse. Tiva was wringing her hands, her face ashen. Nalin spoke. Her voice was flat. "Dead. All the fire gone?" "There is a man at the lower camp." "A white man? Brogan?" Eli's heart hammered. "No," Nalin said. "Worse, a bounty hunter." Eli's stomach clenched. A bounty hunter was not a soldier. A bounty hunter had no rules. "He has," Nalin continued, her eyes as dead as her voice. "A paper, with your face. A drawing. They had a drawing of him. The world was closing in." "He is offering gold," Tiva whispered, her voice trembling so hard she could barely speak. "A lot of gold. $100. For the man who ran. The deserter." Nalin looked at him. And now, the fire was back. A white-hot, furious blaze. He told the men at the lower camp that the cowboy he is hunting is a murderer, a thief, and that any who hide him are enemies of the army. He said he has permission to burn any camp that gives aid. The old woman's warning had not been a suggestion. It was an ultimatum. "She says," Tiva said, the tears finally coming, "we have two choices. We must give you up, or we must flee. Flee now, into the high mountains, into the deep of the storm. Flee, and never come back." The tension that had been simmering for weeks finally, violently, erupted. "Death!" Nalin screamed, and the word was so full of pain it made them all flinch. "You bring death!" She grabbed a burning branch from the fire and threw it against the far wall, where it shattered in a spray of sparks. Sata let out a small, terrified sound and retreated to the deepest shadows. "I told you!" Nalin advanced on Eli, her fists clenched. He stood, using his cane, but she backed him against the rock wall. "I told you he was a curse, a white dog, and you, Tiva, with your spirits, your sacred law. Look what your law has brought us." She pointed a shaking finger at Eli's face. "His face is on a paper. They are hunting him. Not just soldiers, but men who kill for money. They will come here. They will find us. They will see his white skin, and they will see our brown skin, and they will not ask questions. They will burn us. They will do to us what the miners did to her." She pointed to Sata, who was rocking, her hands over her ears. "Nalin, stop!" Tiva cried. "No, he will hear it. He will know what he has done." Nalin turned back to Eli, her eyes blazing, her face wet with tears of rage. "My parents died for nothing. Your brother died for nothing, but I will not let Sata die for him. We will give him up, now, tonight." "No!" Tiva's voice was a shriek. "Yes, it is our lives, or his." Eli looked at the two sisters, their faces torn with grief and fury. He looked at Sata, a small, broken thing in the corner. He saw the drawing of his face, the gold, the bounty hunter, the fire. He had brought this. His past had finally caught them. "You will not give me up," he said, his voice quiet. Nalin stared at him, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "I will." "You will not," Eli said, his voice gaining strength. "Because I am leaving." He pushed himself off the wall, his own face set. "You are not leaving," Nalin said, her voice full of contempt. "You are a cripple. You will die." "Good," Eli said. "That is the point. I will go. I will walk east, toward the lower camp. They will find me. They will see me. Alone. They will have their man. And they will leave you be. They will have no reason to come up here." He limped to his furs, gathering his meager things, his cane, his hatchet. "Eli, no," Tiva pleaded, grabbing his arm. "You cannot. The law. You are ours. Your life is ours." "Then this is how I pay the debt," he said, gently removing her hand. "I am bound to protect you. This is the only way. I am leading them away." "You are already ours," Tiva said, her voice breaking. "You cannot leave. Your soul is here. You will be forsworn." "My soul is the one thing that is not on that paper," he said, his voice rough. "Let me do this. Let me save you. It is the only thing I have left to do." He turned to Nalin. "You will not have to give me up. You will be safe." Nalin just stared at him, her face a confusion of hatred, shock, and a strange, new, unwanted flicker of respect. He was ready. He had his bundle. He turned to the cave mouth. Tiva was sobbing. "No, I will not let you. The spirits will not forgive us." She stood in front of the entrance, blocking his way, her arms spread wide. "You are not leaving. Eli Ward. You are our husband. You will stay. We will all die here, together. But you are not leaving." Her words, "We will all die here," hung in the air. Eli stopped. He looked at her defiant, tear-streaked face. He was not leaving. He was not their prisoner. He was their fate. The fight was over. The decision had been made. That night, the cave was a tomb. The blizzard howled, a mournful, angry sound. Tiva and Sata were asleep, or pretending to be, curled together for comfort, exhausted by the emotional storm. Eli was awake. He sat by the fire, sharpening the hatchet, the sound of the stone on the steel a rhythmic, scraping noise. He was preparing for a fight he could not win. He was a dead man. They were all dead. He heard a movement. He looked up. Nalin, he thought she had been asleep, but she was standing in the shadows, just watching him. She had been watching him for a long time. She walked toward the fire and sat, not beside him, but across from him. They sat in silence for an hour. The only sounds were the wind and the scrape of the stone. He looked at her. Her face was not angry. It was just empty, worn down. All the sharp edges had been scoured away, leaving the raw rock beneath. He saw, for the first time, that she was not a warrior. She was a terrified older sister who had been 22 years old, pretending to be a woman of 50, and she could not pretend anymore. He stopped sharpening the hatchet. He saw that she was trembling. It was not from the cold. Her whole body was shaking. A fine, deep tremor that she was trying to control, but could not. She was breaking. The bounty hunter, the drawing, the threat of fire, Tiva's refusal to run, it had all piled on, and the woman who had held her family together was now falling apart. She made a sound, a low choked noise in the back of her throat. He waited. She looked at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. "I am," she whispered. Her voice cracked. So tired. She had lost her parents. She had taken her broken sisters into the wilderness. She had hunted and fought and hidden and held back her own grief. And now, the world was coming to kill her anyway. "I know," he said, his voice low. She stood up, her movements stiff. He thought she was going back to her furs, but she walked around the fire. She stood in front of him. He looked up at her, and then she fell. She did not sit. She collapsed, kneeling in front of him, her hands on his shoulders to stop her from falling onto the fire. Her face was inches from his. He could see the tracks of old tears on her cheeks, the exhaustion in her dark, dark eyes. She was shaking, and she was crying, silent, hot, angry tears. "We are going to die," she whispered. "Here, in this cave, we are going to die. Maybe," he said, his voice thick. "But not tonight." She stared at him, her breath hitching. She was looking at him, the white man, the curse, the sickness. And he was the only thing there, the only other person awake at the end of the world. "I hate you," she whispered, the words a raw confession. "I know," he said. "I hate you for coming here. I hate you for being alive. I know." And then she kissed him. It was not Tiva's kiss. It was not tender or trembling. It was a collision. It was fierce and angry and full of teeth. She grabbed his hair, her other hand clawing at his shoulder, and she kissed him as if she were trying to draw the life out of him, or push all of her pain into him. It was a kiss of absolute, final desperation. It was the kiss of a woman who had been starving for years, not for a man, but for a single second of release. He was stunned. He was frozen, but he did not push her away. His hands came up, and he held her, his fingers digging into her arms. He held her as she shook, as she wept against his mouth, as all the years of her buried pain, her grief for her parents, her terror for her sisters, her hatred of her life, broke apart. She pulled back, her breath a ragged gasp, and he held her. She was not a warrior. She was a broken, terrified woman. She leaned her forehead against his, her eyes closed, her body trembling violently. He held her, and he stroked her hair, his touch rough, clumsy. He was holding the woman who had threatened to bury him in pieces, and all he felt was a profound, aching pity. She kissed him again, and this time, the anger was gone. It was just need, a raw, bottomless, human need. She pulled at his shirt, her hands clumsy, desperate. He understood. This was not about desire. This was about oblivion. This was about finding one moment of life before the death they all saw coming. He lifted her. She was strong, but she was light. He carried her from the fire to the dark, cold furs in the back of the cave, away from the light. And there, in the darkness, they made love. It was raw. It was a desperate, grasping, frantic thing. It was two people at the end of their rope, clinging to each other in a storm. And then, it was tender. As the frantic energy broke, she collapsed. Her body went limp in his arms, and she began to sob. Not the angry tears from before, but the deep, shuddering, broken sobs of a heart that had been held in for too long. He held her. He just held her. He covered them with the furs, and he held her as she wept. He whispered nonsense things, the way he had hummed the lullaby. He stroked her back. It was the breaking of years of buried pain. She had been strong for so long, and he, the man she hated, was the only one she could be weak for. She cried herself to sleep in his arms, her body finally still, her breathing finally deep. Eli lay awake for the rest of the night, holding her. He listened to the blizzard. He listened to the breathing of Tiva and Sata, and he knew, with a terrible, aching certainty, that everything had just changed. In the first gray light of morning, he woke. He was alone. The furs beside him were cold. Nalin was gone. He sat up, his body aching, his heart a cold stone. He looked around the cave. Her rifle was gone. Her hunting pack was gone. She had left. She had gone out into the storm, to hunt or to run, or to simply not be there when he woke up. He felt a wave of shame so profound it made him sick. He had betrayed Tiva. He had betrayed Saita's trust. He had taken advantage of a woman at her weakest. He was a monster. He was exactly the animal she had always accused him of being. He heard a sound. Tiva. She was awake, sitting by the fire, her back to him. She was feeding small sticks into the embers. She knew the cave was too small. The air was too thick. She had heard, she had felt, she knew. He sat there, naked under the furs, and waited for the judgment. She did not turn around. She just spoke, her voice quiet, almost conversational. To the fire. She is gone. Yes, Eli said, his voice a dry croak. She went to check the high snares. Before the sun, in the storm. She never does that. She is ashamed. Eli could say nothing. You are, Tiva said, still not looking at him. A man of great power, Eli Ward. You have broken my sister, the one who could not be broken? Eli threw back the furs and stood, pulling on his clothes, his hands shaking. He felt like a criminal. Tiva, I did not, it was not. He stood behind her, helpless. I am sorry. I expect you to be furious. Furious! She finally turned. Her face was not angry. It was pale and sad, but her eyes were clear. She is my sister, Tiva said, as if that explained everything. Her pain is my pain. Her release is mine. He stared, not understanding. You are a white man, she said, and for the first time, it was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, an explanation for his ignorance. You do not understand. You refused us. You refused the law. You said you could not belong to 3 women. That was your shame. That was your sin. She stood up, and she was close. Her eyes were searching his. Last night, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. My sister, the one who hates you, the one who would rather die than touch you, she accepted the law. She came to you. She took you. She sealed the bond that you refused. He was stunned. What? She broke her pride. She broke her grief. And she accepted her fate. She accepted you. She is no longer ashamed of the law. Eli. She is ashamed that she was the first. She is ashamed that she took what was ours, all of us, for herself. Tiva reached up, her hand trembling, and touched his cheek. We already share you, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Your soul is tied to ours. My sister has shared your body. She has shared her pain with you. She leaned in, her gaze intense. Now, she whispered, let us feel it. And she kissed him. It was her kiss, gentle, trembling, and full of a sad, sweet, spiritual power. It was not the desperate kiss by the fire. This was a kiss of acceptance, of completion. We are one life, she whispered against his lips. What you do to her, you do to me. What you give her, you give me. Do you understand now? He looked into her eyes, and he finally understood. This was not about lust. This was not about love, not as he knew it. This was about survival. It was about shared souls, a sacred, binding law that was stronger than grief, stronger than hatred, and, perhaps, stronger than death. That night, Nalin returned. She was covered in snow, 2 rabbits at her belt. She did underscore not look at Eli. She did not look at Tiva. She just put the food down, cleaned her rifle, and sat by the fire. The silence was different. It was not angry. It was heavy, Finished. When it was time to sleep, Eli lay down on his furs. He heard Tiva lie down, not on her own furs, but beside him, on his right. She did not touch him, but she was there, her warmth a presence. He heard Sada. She came, as she had before, and curled up, not on his chest this time, but against his side, under his arm, her hand clutching his shirt. Then he heard the last movement. Nalin. She did not go to her own bed. She lay down on his other side. The left. She lay on her back, her arms crossed, staring at the roof of the A-cave. The three women. They were beside him. He was in the middle, a log in a fire, surrounded by the three of them. The moment was so emotionally intense it was almost painful. He could feel Texamplia's quiet breathing. He could feel Sata's small, trusting warmth. He could feel Nalin's rigid, protective, and finally, present, energy. No one spoke. This was it, the healing, the soul-bearing. He was not Eli Ward, the runaway. He was not the curse. He was, finally, their sacred husband. He was the man who would not shoot unarmed prisoners, and he was the man who would not abandon these women. He felt Sada's hand unclench, her breathing deepen. He felt Tiva sigh, a sound of profound release, as if a great weight had been lifted from her soul, and he felt the rigid line of Nalin's body, inches from his. Finally, relax. He closed his eyes, surrounded by them, a shield of broken, healing women. He felt a peace so deep he did not recognize it. For the first time since Jedediah Pike had died, he fell asleep, and he did not have a single nightmare. He was woken by a sound that did not belong. A gunshot. It was not the crack of Nalin's hunting rifle. It was a heavy, deep boom, a sound of a Spencer or a Winchester. It echoed, rolling down the valley. Eli was on his feet instantly, his legs screaming. The women were already up. Nalin was at the cave mouth, her rifle in her hand. Tiva was holding Sata, who was trembling. Then another shot, and another. They were not hunting. They were not random. They were close, too close. Nalin looked back at him, her face pale, all the peace of the night shattered. "They are in the valley," she whispered. Then they heard it, the sound of men shouting in English, and the jangle of horses moving through the snow. They were here. The world outside the cave mouth had become a new kind of hell. The shouting was closer now, the voices of at least 4 or 5 men. They were not the disciplined calls of soldiers. They were rough, angry, and profane, the sound of men who were paid by the day and enjoyed their work. "Spread out," one man bellowed, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "They're up here. I can smell the smoke. Find the camp. Harrison said burn it all. $100 for the man, 50 for the squaws." Eli, Nalin, Tiva, and Sata were pressed against the cold stone just inside the cave, hidden by the curtain of ivy. Nalin had her rifle. Eli had the hatchet. Tiva had her knife and her medicine bag, her knuckles white. Sata held her small spear, her body a single, taut wire of terror. Eli's blood ran cold. 50 for the squaws. These were not lawmen. They were not even bounty hunters. They were slavers, murderers, hired by Harrison. This was not about justice. This was an extermination. He saw the first man. He rode into the small clearing by the spring, his horse trampling the ice. He was a big man, bearded, with a greasy buffalo coat. He spat on the snow. "No camp," he yelled. "Just a spring. Where are the red bastards hiding?" Another man, thin and wiry, appeared on foot. "The tracks go up, into the rocks. Up there." He pointed, not at the cave, but higher up the ridge. "Then we go up," the big man said, dismounting. "Find their den, and we burn them out." Eli looked at the faces of the women. Tiva was praying, her lips moving silently. Sata was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Nalin was staring down the sight of her rifle, her face a mask of such pure, cold hatred that it frightened him. He had brought this fire, this filth, to them. He made a decision. It was the only one. He had failed to lead them away. He had failed to protect them. He could only do one thing now. He put his hand on Naleen's rifle, gently pushing the barrel down. She looked at him, her eyes full of murder. "No," he whispered. "Don't shoot. Not yet. They are here," she hissed. "They are here for me," he said, his voice quiet, final. "Let me end it." Before Tiva could speak, before Nahaleen could argue, he moved. He pushed aside the hide and stepped out onto the ledge, his hands held high, his cane left behind. "Hold your fire," he shouted, his voice cracking in the cold air. The men in the clearing froze. The big man turned, a grin splitting his beard as he saw Eli. "Well, well," the man shouted, raising his heavy rifle. "Look what we flushed out, the deserter, Eli Ward." "I'm the man you want," Eli called, his voice shaking but loud. "You found me. Let them go. The women, they have no part in this. They were forced to hide me." The big man laughed, a sound like gravel. "Is that right? Well, we'll take that into consideration. After we have you, come on down, boy. Or we come up." "I'm coming," Eli said. He took a step, his bad leg protesting. He was going to surrender. He would give himself up. And they would kill him. And maybe, just maybe, they would be satisfied and leave. He took another step, his foot slipping on the icy rock. "Eli, no!" Tiva screamed from inside the cave. "Shut up, you fool!" Naleen's voice was a raw cry. Eli turned his head, to tell them to stay hidden, to run, and he was met by the flat, stinging force of a hand striking his face. Naleen was outside. She had dropped her rifle and she slapped him. Hard. The sound was as sharp as a gunshot in the still air. He stumbled back, stunned, his cheek burning, tasting his own blood. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her face inches from his, her eyes too black, burning coals of fury. "You are not dying before I do," she hissed, her voice shaking with a rage that was deeper than the canyon. "You do not get to die. You do not get to be a martyr. You are ours, and we are not finished with you." "Naleen," he stammered. "They will kill you." "Let them try," she whispered, her voice a sacred promise of violence. "But you will not surrender. You are Ende's husband. You will fight, or I will kill you myself." "Get him!" the man below roared, impatient. "Shoot the squaw and take him!" The wiry man raised his rifle. Naleen shoved Eli backward, into the cave. A bullet splintered the rock where he had been standing, the sound a sharp ping followed by the roar of the gun. They were all inside, their hearts pounding. The truce was over. "We cannot stay here," Eli said, his cheek throbbing, his mind racing. "They will climb up. They will trap us." "We run," Naleen said, grabbing her rifle. "Where?" Tiva cried. "The snow is deep. They have horses." As if in answer, a small, hard object wrapped in hide was thrown into the cave. It landed on the floor, and the three women stared at it. It was a message. Tiva unwrapped it. It was a piece of charcoal, and a smooth, flat stone. "What is it?" Eli asked. "A runner," Naleen said, her voice grim. She was watching the cave mouth. "From the elders. From the old woman." Tiva read the markings, her face pale. "She says, the mountain is no place for a battle. The white men are too many." "Their guns are too loud. They will bring the soldiers." She looked at Eli, her eyes full of a terrible finality. "They say we must disappear, or we must fight alone." They were cut off, their own people, to save themselves. We're abandoning them. They were on their own. "Then we do not fight," Eli said, his mind working, the fear being replaced by a cold, clear purpose. "Not here. We run." "We cannot outrun them," Naleen said. "We do not have to?" Eli said. He looked at the three of them, the hunter, the healer, the ghost. "We just have to be smarter. They are loud. They are clumsy. They do not know this mountain. We do." A new plan began to form, born of desperation and the terrain itself. "Naleen," he said, his voice now a low, sharp command that surprised them all. "The high paths, the goat tracks. Where do they go?" "They go to the ridge," she said, "above the valley. But they are narrow, dangerous. Good, Eli said. Tiva, the rocks. Are there places that are unstable? Tiva thought for a second. Yes, the high pass, the one we call the Widowmaker. The spring thaw, the rocks are loose. A loud noise, a rock slide, Eli finished. He looked at Sata. And you are quiet. Can you move without being seen? Sata just stared at him, but her hand tightened on her spear. Good, Eli said again. Here is the plan. We do not run from them. We lead them. He grabbed a piece of charcoal and began to draw on the flat cave floor. We cannot beat 5 men with 1 rifle, he said, his voice low and urgent. But we can beat them with this. He tapped the rock. The mountain. The plan was desperate, and it was deadly. They would not run. They would lead. They would use the terrain, the narrow canyons, the rock slides, to funnel the gunmen into a trap. They would lead them to the Widowmaker. We leave, Eli said. Now, out the back. The cave, their home, their prison, had a second, smaller opening, a chimney of rock that led to a high ledge, barely wide enough for a single person. It was a what-if escape, a place only the women knew. Sata, Eli ordered. You go first. You are the quietest. Be our eyes, Nalin. You are last. You have the rifle. You will watch our retreat. Tiva, you are with me. They moved. Sata, her fear replaced by a cold, silent focus, slipped into the chimney and was gone. Tiva, her medicine bag tied to her back, followed. Eli, his leg a fiery protest, used his arms and his one good leg to pull himself up the rough stone. Last came Nalin, her rifle slung over her back, her eyes on the cave mouth, which was now filled with shouting as the men began their climb. They were on the high ledge, 1,000 feet above the valley floor, the wind tearing at them. They are coming, Nalin said, her voice tight. 4 of them. 1 stayed with the horses. 4 is better than 5, Eli panted, the cold air burning his lungs. Sata, he called, and the girl appeared from behind a rock. He pointed. The path, the Widowmaker, lead us. She nodded, and they began to move. It was not a run. It was a climb, a desperate, agonizing scramble over ice-slicked rock and through waist-deep drifts. Eli's leg was a torment. He fell. He got up. He fell again. Tiva stayed with him, her hand on his back, steadying him. I am too slow, he gasped, the pain making him sick. You are not, Tiva said, her voice firm. You are a rock. Now move. Behind them, they could hear the men, cursing, slipping. They're following, the wiry man's voice echoed. I see them, up on the ridge. A shot rang out, the bullet whining off the rock far to their left. They are clumsy, Nalin said, her voice full of contempt. They are shooting at shadows. They reached the pass. It was a narrow canyon, a split in the mountain, barely 10 feet wide. On one side, the rock wall was a sheet of ice. On the other, it was a high, crumbling wall of scree and boulders, held in place by snow and wishful thinking. This is it, Tiva whispered, her face pale. Good, Eli said, leaning against the rock, his body trembling with exhaustion. Now, we set the trap. The plan was simple. They would lure the men into the canyon, and then they would bring the mountain down. Nalin, Eli said, find a place, high, where you can see. We need a distraction, something to make them stop, right in the middle. She nodded, her eyes sharp. I know a place. Sata, you are with me and Tiva. We're going to climb. We need to be above the scree. We need to find the trigger. The trigger? Tiva asked. The one rock, Eli said, his eyes on the loose wall. That holds the rest. We will push it, and the mountain will do the rest. They split up. Nalin, with her rifle, climbed like a spider up the icy wall to a small, hidden nook. Eli, Tiva, and Sakta began the perilous climb up the loose scree. Every step was a prayer. A dislodged pebble could start the slide too soon, or warn the men. They were 200 feet above the canyon floor when Eli saw it. A large boulder, a keystone, perched precariously. "There," he whispered. They could hear the men entering the canyon below. "Damn this cold," the big man's voice echoed. "Where did they go?" "They're in here," the wiry man said. "The tracks lead right in. We've got them. They're trapped." Eli smiled, a grim, cold smile. "He's right," he whispered to Tiva. "We've got them." They waited. The three of them, Eli, Tiva, and Sata, put their shoulders to the rock. It was cold, heavy. It would not budge. "They are in the middle," Eli whispered, his heart hammering. "Now, Nalin." Tiva prayed, as if she had heard. A shot cracked from the high ledge. It was not aimed at the men. It was aimed at the rock wall behind them, at the entrance to the canyon. A large chunk of ice and rock exploded, blocking the path they had just come. "What the hell?" the big man roared. Turning, "It's a trap! Shoot her!" the wiry man screamed, raising his rifle at the puff of smoke from Nalin's ledge. "Now!" Eli yelled. He, Tiva, and Sata threw their entire weight against the boulder. It teetered, it groaned, and then it fell. It did not fall alone. It took its neighbors, and they took theirs. The sound was not a sound. It was a force, a deafening, rolling, grinding roar that was the mountain itself, waking up a wall of rock, ice and snow, 1,000,000 tons of it. Fell into the narrow canyon. Eli, Tiva, and Sata clung to the good rock. The dust and snow so thick they could not breathe, could not see. The roar lasted for 30 seconds. And then, silence. A silence more profound, more final than the noise. Eli, coughing, looked down. The canyon was gone. It was filled, choked with boulders the size of cabins. There was no pass. There was no path. And there were no men. "We did it," Tiva whispered, her voice full of awe and terror. Eli looked at his hands, raw and bleeding from the rock. He had not fired a shot. He had not killed anyone. The mountain had, but the victory was short-lived. 2 of them, a voice spat. Eli whirled. The wiry man. And another. They had been at the back of the group. They had been far enough back to be missed by the main slide. They were alive, and they were looking up at Eli. Tiva and Sata. The wiry man raised his rifle. "No!" Eli shouted, and he did the only thing he could. He shoved Tiva and Sata, pushing them flat against the rock as he threw himself in front of them. The rifle roared. Eli felt a sharp, burning sting, a punch to his side, but he felt another. He heard a sound, a small, wet thud next to him, and he heard Satata cry out, not her scream of terror, but a pained, sharp, animal sound. He looked. The man had fired twice. 1 bullet had grazed Eli's ribs, a bloody, burning line. The other bullet had hit Sata. It had struck her in the back, just below the shoulder. As she was falling, "Sata!" Tiva screamed. The wiry man was working his rifle, trying to load another shot, his hands shaking. A shot rang out. From above, the wiry man's head snapped back, and he fell, his rifle clattering on the rocks. Nalin, the last man, the 4th one, looked at his dead friend, looked up at the ledge where Nalin was, looked at the rock slide that had eaten his boss, and he ran. He turned and scrambled back over the rocks, fleeing for his life, but Eli did not see him. He was only looking at Sata. She was lying on the scree, her face pale, a dark, wet stain spreading across her deerskin shift. "No," Eli whispered. "No, no, no." He scrambled to her. "Sata, it's all right. We are safe." She looked at him, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with a strange, dark confusion. Tiva was at her side instantly, her hands pressing against the wound, her face a mask of desperate, focused grief. "It is bad," Tiva whispered, her voice breaking. "It is deep. Oh, spirits, it is deep. We have to move," Nalin yelled, climbing down to them, her rifle in her hand. "The last one. He will go to the horses. He will get the 5th man. They will come back, or they will go for more. We can't move her. Eli said, his voice raw. We have to, Nalin said, her face grim. We die here, or we run. Tiva, can you stop it? Tiva was packing the wound with moss from her bag, her hands covered in blood. I can slow it, but she is bleeding inside. I can feel it. Eli looked at Sata. Her skin was already turning a pale, waxy gray. I will carry her, he said. He sheathed his hatchet. He ignored the fire in his ribs. He gently, so gently, slid his arm under Sata's body. He lifted her. She was so light. She was just a child. Eli, she whispered, her voice a tiny thread of sound. I have you, he said, his voice choking. I have you. We are going. He began to walk, to climb, carrying her, his bad leg forgotten, his own wound forgotten. Nalin led, her rifle ready. Tiva was right behind him, her hand on Saita, as if she could hold her to this world by touch alone. They ran. They scrambled through the dark woods, the snow-covered pines, as the sun began to set, leaving the valley of death behind them. They moved for hours. Eli's world shrank to the small, light body in his arms. He walked until his leg was numb, until his arms were screaming, until his own blood was soaking his shirt. Sata was quiet, too quiet. Eli, she whispered, her voice so faint he had to put his ear to her lips. He stopped. Nalin and Tiva stopped. The woods were dark. Eli, she said again, her small hand coming up, her fingers touching his cheek. I am here, Sata, he said, his tears falling hot on her cold face. I am here. She looked at him, her dark eyes full of a strange, adult wisdom. I don't want, she whispered, her breath a tiny puff of white, to die before I kiss you. Her voice, the one she had been denied, had returned, and this is what she asked for. A life, a kiss. Eli's heart broke. He had kissed Tiva in desperation. He had held Nalin in her grief. He looked at this child woman, who had seen hell, who had offered him her silence, her loyalty, and now, her last, dying wish. He leaned down, and with tears streaming down his face, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of profound, heartbreaking tenderness. It was a kiss of a father, a brother, a husband. It was a kiss of goodbye. Her lips were cold, but she kissed him back. A faint, tiny pressure. Then, her hand fell from his face, and her eyes closed. No! Tiva screamed. She is breathing, Nalin said, her voice a raw command. She is breathing! Do not stop! Eli, do not stop! He found a new strength. A strength born of her words, of her kiss. He would not let her die. He held her tighter, and he moved. They found a place. Hours later, a cave, high above the valley. A den. It was dry and deep and smelled of bear, but it was empty. Here, Nalin said, collapsing at the entrance. We will be safe here. Eli carried Sata inside, to the very back, and laid her on a bed of furs. Snow, the storm, which had held off, had returned. It began to fall, thick and heavy, sealing the mouth of the den, covering their tracks, and trapping them together. They were safe from the gunmen. They were prisoners of the mountain. Nalin built a small, smokeless fire. Tiva, her face a mask of desperate concentration, was tending to Sata. She had stripped her and was cleaning the wound. The bullet, it is still in her, Tiva said, her voice hollow. She looked at Eli. And you? She looked at his side. His shirt was a frozen, bloody rag. She came to him and, with a grim efficiency, cut the shirt away. The bullet had torn a 4-inch gash along his ribs. It was deep, bloody, but it had not gone in. You are lucky, she whispered. She is not, he said, looking at Sata. Tiva cleaned his wound, packed it with the last of her pine pitch, and bound it tightly. The pain was excruciating, but he barely felt it. He went to Sata. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow, her face the color of the snow outside. Tiva was working, her hands moving, stitching the wound, packing it, praying. Nalin sat, her rifle across her knees, guarding the mouth of the den. Though nothing could get through the wall of snow, they were trapped for days. The blizzard raged. The four of them, in a small, dark hole in the rock, huddled together. Tiva did all she could for Sata. She boiled snow and forced water between her lips. She made broth from the last of their dried meat. Eli and Nalin just watched and waited. On the third day, the fever took Sata. She began to burn. She thrashed, calling out, not in English, not in Apache, but in a strange, babbling, fever language. Tiva bathed her, her face grim. Her body is fighting, but the poison, the bullet, I cannot get it. That night, it was the coldest. The fire was just embers. The wind was a demon. Sata was still, too still. Tiva was asleep, her head on Eli's good shoulder, exhausted. Nalin was on his other side, her back to him, but she was pressed against him, sharing the last of their warmth. Eli was in the middle, awake. He was looking at Sata, who lay in front of the fire, a tiny, still form. He was not a hunter. He was not a warrior. He was a man who had failed to protect anyone. Pike was dead, and now Sata. He had accepted their food. He had accepted their medicine. He had accepted their bodies. He had accepted their law, but he had never said it. He had never made the choice. He had refused. He looked at Tiva, sleeping against him. He looked at Nalin, who had given him her pain. He looked at Sata, who had given him her first and last kiss. And he knew. He gently, so he would not wake them, touched Tiva's hair. He touched Nalin's shoulder. They stirred, their sleep so light. Nalin turned, her eyes opening, black in the dim light. Tiva lifted her head, her face full of sleep and grief. They were all huddled together for warmth. Eli looked at the two of them, the two sisters who were left. I am yours, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper in the dark, cold den. They stared at him. I am yours, he said again, the words a vow, a final surrender. If you will still have me, he had not chosen. He had been chosen, by the river, by the law, by the kiss, by the blood. But now, he was choosing back. Tiva's eyes filled with tears. She did not say anything. She just leaned her head back on his shoulder, her hand coming up to cover his. Nalin, the hard one, the woman of stone, looked at him for a long, long time. Then she let out a breath, a slow, shuddering sigh that was the end of a lifetime of fighting. She did not move her body. She did not press against him, but she reached her hand back, her strong, calloused hunter's hand, and she found his. She laced her fingers with his, in the silence of the bear den. As the storm raged outside and death waited in the corner, the sacred marriage was sealed. Spring came, not as a celebration, but as a slow, painful argument with the snow. The blizzard in the high mountains lasted for 10 days, a white and howling siege that kept them pinned in the bear den. For 10 days, they were a world of four, huddled around a fire that was little more than smoke, sharing the last of the dried rabbits, their bodies pressed together for warmth. And in those 10 days, Sata lived. She did not wake. She lay in a deep, feverish sleep, her life held by a single, thin thread. Tiva never left her. She dripped water between her cracked lips. She bathed her burning face with snow. She whispered the old prayers, the songs of healing, her voice a low, constant hum in the darkness. Eli and Nalin simply existed, a silent, unmoving guard. They were bound by the vow he had made, a family forged in a blizzard, waiting to see if their youngest would be taken from them. On the 11th day, the storm broke. A single weak shaft of sunlight pierced the opening of the den, and Sata's eyes opened. She was weak. She was a skeleton, but she was alive. The fever was gone. Tiva wept, a sound of pure, unbridled relief, her head falling onto Eli's chest. He held her. Nalin, her face like stone, went to Sata and, with a hand that was surprisingly gentle, touched her forehead. She is cool, Nalin whispered. The spirit has decided. The bullet was still in her. It would be a part of her forever, a piece of that day, a piece of that violence, buried in her back. But she had survived. When the snow had melted enough to walk, they left the den. Sata could not walk. Eli, his own rib wound a tight, fiery line, made a travois. He pulled her, his new wife, his daughter, his charge, down from the high rocks. Her recovery was slow. When she finally tried to stand, her leg buckled. The bullet had done more than just take her blood. It had damaged the nerves. She would walk, but with a limp. It was a permanent, rolling gait, a physical reminder of the rock slide and the rifle. She would never again move like a shadow. She would carry the mountain with her, but she was alive. She was here. They could not return to the old cave. It was a place of ghosts, a place marked by violence. The bounty hunter who had fled, the fifth man who had waited by the horses. They would be long gone, but the story would remain. That valley was now a place on a map for men like them. "We go deeper," Eli said. And this time it was not a question or a suggestion. It was the decision of a husband. "We go where the horses cannot follow." Nalin nodded. "I know a place, high up, where my grandmother's people used to summer. The white men have never seen it. It has water. It has sun. They traveled for a week. It was a migration." Eli and Nalin hunted, their one rifle and his hatchet. Tiva and Saita, who now leaned on a cane Eli had carved for her, foraged. They moved as a single unit, a small, wary but unbreakable band. The valley was a miracle. It was a high, hidden bowl in the mountains, protected on three sides by sheer granite cliffs. A stream, fed by the high snows, ran through it. The southern face was open to the sun, and the floor was rich with good, black earth. "Here," Nalin said, dropping her pack. "Here we will build." And they worked. The spring was a season of labor. Eli, his leg now just a dull ache, his ribs healing, found a strength he did not know he possessed. He was no longer a cowboy. He was a builder. He cut pine, and he hauled stone. They did not build a white man's cabin. They did not build an Apache wickiup. They built a home. It was made of rock and timber, dug into the side of the hill, its roof covered in earth and grass, so that, from above, it was invisible. It was strong, like Eli. It was hidden, like Nalin. It was warm, like Tiva. And it was a sanctuary. For Sata, it had one room, a large fire pit, and 4 sleeping platforms, built of pine and fir. They were, for the first time, truly home. The summer was peaceful. They were isolated, 1,000 miles from the world of reservations, soldiers and bounty men. Eli's past, his old life, seemed as distant as the moon. His skin turned a deep brown. He learned the rhythm of the mountain. He learned to be quiet. He learned to listen. Not with his ears, but with his whole body. As they did, the peace was broken. Not by a gunshot, but by a polite, hesitant call. "Eli! Eli Ward!" Eli was checking a snare line by the stream. He froze. The voice was English. It was a woman's voice, and it was a voice from his past. He stood. Nalin was at the house in an instant, her rifle in her hands, her eyes scanning the rocks. Tiva and Sakta were shadows at the door. A woman stepped out from the trees. She was white. She was young, in her early 20s, wearing a practical riding skirt and a traveler's dusty hat. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. Eli's hatchet fell from his hand. "Sarah," he breathed. It was Sarah Pike, Jedediah's daughter. She stared at him, at his long hair, his deerskin leggings, his beard. She stared at the scar on his face from Nalin's first warning. "My God," she whispered. "It is you. I was told. A bounty hunter came back to town, half mad. He said a cowboy was living with the Apache, that the mountain had eaten his men. I had to see." "Sarah, what are you doing here?" he said, his voice rough. "It is not safe." "I came to find you." "Eli," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I came to bring you home." She rushed to him, and he held her for a second. A strange, awkward embrace. He was holding a ghost. "Home," he said. "It's over," she said, pulling back, her face full of a bright, urgent news. "It's finally over. I did it, Eli. For my father, I took what you told me, what you saw, and I found another man. A quartermaster Brogan had cheated. We went to a territorial judge. We had proof. She was talking fast, the words tumbling out. And Brogan, oh, Eli, he's dead. He was in a saloon in Tucson, drunk and bragging. He got in a fight with one of his own men over a card game, and the man shot him. He's dead. Eli, Harrison's contracts are all void. The Army, they are ashamed. They cleared Pa's name, and they cleared yours. She grabbed his hands. Her hands were soft. Your name is cleared, Eli. You are not a deserter. You are a hero. You can come back. You are free. The word hung in the thin mountain air. Free. He could go back. He could be Eli Ward again. He could have a farm. He could go to a church. He could be normal. He looked at Sarah, at her clean, hopeful, white face. A face from a life he had almost forgotten. Then he looked past her, up the hill. He saw the small, strong house built of rock and earth. He saw Tiva, her hands covered in dirt from the garden, her face open and afraid. He saw Sada, her hand on her cane, her limp a mark of her survival, her eyes on him, loyal and true. And he saw Nalin, standing by the door, her rifle held loosely at her side. She was not looking at Sarah. She was looking at him. Her face was hard, but her eyes were not. Her eyes were saying what she had never said. Do not go. He turned back to Sarah. He gently took his hands from hers. I am free, Sarah, he said, his voice quiet, and for the first time, he knew it was the truth. He pointed to the small, hidden valley. This is where I live now, he said. Her face fell. The hopeful, bright light went out. What? Eli, no, you cannot. This is not your life. They are not your people. They are, he said. They found me when I was dead. They gave me a life. A life? She said, her voice rising, on the edge of hysteria. Hiding in the rocks, like an animal? My father died so that men like Brogan could not win. He died for the law. You are turning your back on him, on everything we fought for. No, Sarah, Eli said, his voice gentle. I am not turning my back on the law. I am just living by a different one, a sacred one. I am a husband. Sarah's eyes went wide. She looked at the three women on the hill. Not one, but three. The bounty hunter's story had not been a lie. Oh, God, she whispered, her face a mask of horror and pity. They have made you a captive. They have bewitched you. No, Eli said. They have saved me. She stared at him, at the quiet certainty in his eyes. She was her father's daughter, and she recognized a man who had made his peace, a man who was living by a code, even if she could not understand it. She took a step back, her shoulders slumping. You are not coming back, she said. It was not a question. I am home, he said. She nodded. Once, the tears now falling freely. Goodbye, Eli Ward. God keep you. She turned, and without looking back, she walked to her horse, which was tethered in the trees. Eli watched her go. He watched the last piece of his old life ride out of the canyon, until the sound of the horse's hooves was gone, swallowed by the wind. He was alone. He was free. He was home. He turned and walked up the hill. Tiva, who had understood most, explained to the others. Nalin listened, her face grim. That night, the four of them sat by the fire, under the stars. The air was thick with the change. The last link to his old world, the last threat, was broken. Nalin was staring into the flames. She was from your life, Nalin said, her English quiet. Yes, Eli said. She wanted you to go. To the railroad, to the sea. Eli looked at her, surprised. I used to dream of that, Nalin said, her voice low, a confession he had never heard. When I was a girl, before the raid, I saw a picture, in a book, of the big water, San Francisco. I wanted to see it. I wanted to ride the iron horse. I wanted to escape. She poked the fire with a stick. I thought freedom was somewhere else, a place where I was not Apache, a place where I was just a woman. She looked up at him, her eyes catching the firelight. But I know they would not see a woman. They would see an Indian. They would see a savage. I would be just as trapped as I am at San Carlos, just a different cage. She looked at Tiva, who was half asleep, her head on Eli's shoulder. She looked at Sata, who was listening, her face calm in the firelight. "Here," Nalin said, her voice rough. "I am not free, but I am seen." She looked at Eli. "You see me? Not just an Apache, not just a hunter. I see you, Nalin," he said, his voice quiet. "You are my freedom. Eli Ward," she whispered, a truth so profound it shocked them both. "My freedom is not in running. It is in being loved for all that I am." He put his arm around her, and she leaned against him. The three of them, Tiva on one side, Nalin on the other, they had planted. The spring had been a time of building, and the summer was a time of growth. In the small, rich valley, their life was taking root. They had planted corn and squash and beans, the three sisters of the Enda. Tiva had planted her wild herbs, her medicines, her sacred roots. Life was returning. It returned in small ways. One afternoon, as Eli was mending a trap, he heard a sound, a low, soft humming. He turned. Sata was sitting in the sun, her bad legs stretched out, her hands weaving a basket. She was humming. It was the lullaby, the one Tiva had taught him. Her voice, the one she had lost, was still locked away, but her song had returned. He smiled and did not move, for fear of breaking the spell. And one evening, Tiva, who had carried the grief of her brother for so long, laughed. Eli had been carrying 2 heavy skins of water from the spring. He stumbled, his bad leg catching a root, and he went down, sprawling, the water splashing all over him. He sat up, sputtering, soaked and muddy, and looked at her. She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking, and then it came, a peal of laughter, a real, bright, clear sound, like the spring water itself. Eli, seeing her, began to laugh too. He sat in the mud and laughed until his wounded ribs ached. It was the first time in 2 years Tiva had laughed. It was the first time in his life Eli had felt such joy. At the close of the day, they lay beneath the stars. The fire was a bed of red, glowing embers. The 4 of them were on the furs, a tangle of limbs, a blanket of shared warmth. Eli was in the middle. He was home. He looked at the woman on his left. Nalin, the survivor, the warrior, his fierce protector. He leaned over and kissed her, a long, slow kiss of respect and heat and partnership. He looked at the woman on his right, Tiva, the healer, the spirit, his gentle heart. He turned and kissed her, a kiss of tenderness, of peace, of shared prayer. And he looked at the woman curled at his feet, her head resting on his legs. Sata, the silent, the shadow, his loyal, healed soul. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a kiss of protection, of fatherhood, of pure, unblemished love. He lay back, his arms around his wives, and looked up at the spray of the stars. "I was half dead when you found me," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet. He felt Tiva and Nalin press closer. "I was nothing, just a shell, running from a ghost." He took a deep breath of the cold, pine-scented air. "Now," he whispered, "I have never felt more alive." He lay there, between them, surrounded by these 3 fierce, broken, healing women. He felt the steady beat of Tiva's heart, the solid, strong warmth of Nalin, the trusting weight of Sata,